So I think for me, the biggest walk away was learning how to fail as fast as humanly possible. Look for triggers, look for failure points, because if you're not looking for failure points, you're not looking to learn and to grow and to develop.
Welcome to the How to Not Execute Your Strategy podcast. I'm your host, Tim Ohai. These are the lessons that make you the leader you want to be. Go to timohai.com to learn more. My guest today is Jim McCormick. Jim's a legendary leader who's managed highly complex business strategies, all while keeping his people a top priority. Honestly, he's one of the best leaders I've ever worked with, and you're going to enjoy this conversation. See the show notes for more information about Jim and to also get access to the leader guide for this episode. Let's get to it. Jim, it's great to have you on the podcast. It's so good to see your face again, my friend. How are you?
Great, Tim. Good to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's a joy. Folks, I've known Jim for, I'd say decades. It's been a while. With that said, Jim's also one of my favorite leaders that I've ever worked with. And I'm just delighted that he's going to be on today. So Jim, without any further ado, I just want to dive right in. Tell us the story of a time that you had a strategy that did not go as planned, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, fortunately, Tim, with strategies, which we all know, especially in the scope that I want to share with your audience today, is in a sales arena, right? Which is my background, my experience, but specifically in sales, a strategy is, quite frankly, it's only good the day it's written. The minute you go to execute a strategy, you have market dynamics, you have people dynamics, customer dynamics. You have internal logistic dynamics, so that strategy gets pivoted quickly, right? And your ability to pivot quickly dictates the success and ultimately the outcome. But the strategy I want to share with you is about we needed significant growth to achieve and reach a 5-year revenue growth strategy, which we had launched. And in doing so, the sales organization was very good at mining the current customers, expanding our portfolio and our reach within our customer base. And where we needed help and improvement was landing new customers, new business, bringing in more customers and portfolio, right, to reach this revenue.
And that means essentially taking them away from competition that is also good at protecting its stuff, right? So
Precisely.
I mean, it's very. I mean, I know we're talking, oil and gas folks, and consumer products, a little fancier than just sludge, but we're talking very entrenched territories, and you're literally talking about converting people to leave the land of Goshen that they've been living in to go live somewhere else.
Very mature market with long-term relationships with oil suppliers, right? And ultimately, Tim, this became a people strategy, right? We were talking about human capital that needed to execute differently to achieve new business development. And we had some of the best salespeople in the industry. And you know this well because you trained and developed a large number of these people, right? So you know the players here. But the working premise that we were executing against was that our people were spread too thin. And these are professional sales managers, account managers, sales reps. They were in the market and their days were full with managing their current customer base. And now we needed them to step outside and to go prospect new qualified leads, to approach these customers, put a negotiation strategy together, all the while maintaining their current customer base, right? Next to impossible. So we launched this in-depth study to understand where their selling time was being used. How do we free up that selling time? Non-selling, non-value added. How do we release that? We even went to the step of identifying drive time between customers to learn really what the time allocation was. Wow. And ultimately, Tim, the end result is we reduced the number of customers per sales professional, and we freed up their time to go and launch. This ultimately required a restructure.
Sure.
So we restructured a pretty good portion of the sales organization.
That must have been like highly disruptive. I mean,
that was the best
I can't
part.
imagine the reaction of people.
Yeah, no, that was the disruption that it caused, not only with our own people, but with our customers. That they were potentially losing their point of contact. And the other dilemma that I learned during that sort of restructure process and resetting what their goals and objectives were, role clarity became a real issue. We weren't real clear. Our sales organization wasn't real clear on what they had to go do and when they had to go do it. That took time. It was a bit of a culture shift. And anytime you go that deep into an organization's operating model, you're going to have the disruption. You're going to have the lack of clarity. Net, we launched, Tim, and we executed against the strategy, and it failed. It didn't work.
It just landed like a rock, huh?
No, it landed like a rock. We had some hot spots where we had some really talented salespeople that could hunt. And so but not the scale that was required to achieve a 5-year growth strategy. It didn't come together. So guess what we did as a leadership team? With me at the helm, we became fixated on correcting it, on making it work. So we started pouring ton of resources, marketing funds. We invested in more research and more training, and we spent months trying to execute a strategy that simply wasn't going to work.
If you pause for a moment, there's something you said at the very beginning in your preamble around dynamics, HR dynamics, logistical dynamics, market dynamics, competitor, economic, all these dynamics. And then you said something fascinating, that it was really a people strategy. Is dynamics another way of saying people dynamics? And because ultimately I do get that there are supply chain issues. Sometimes you have supply, sometimes you don't. Sometimes a supplier can meet the volume you're asking for. Sometimes that's separate from just getting humans to work together cross-functionally, and to all have the same definition of success, and to also know enough about not only their role, but their teammates. I think about like the famous sports teams that, do your job is their motto. And they not only know their job, they know the jobs of everybody else in the team. And it sounds like you had a situation where people did not know what each other's role was. They were just so busy doing theirs, whatever they thought theirs was. Is that fair to summarize it this way?
Precisely. I actually could not describe that better. And to tag on to that, Tim, I think what's important here, the concept of it being a people strategy, when you think about business at its lowest common denominator, people do business with people. Companies, we say our companies do business, we're partners, but at the end of the day, when you really break it down, people do business with people. Listen, people lead people, people follow people. It's simply people. And as leaders, when we get our head around the concept that everything we do is people, and the people component, the human capital component, is your greatest line of defense. It's your greatest line of success. And ultimately, to the point you were making, when you get the communications lined up, when you get the role clarities lined up, and people understand what people are doing, people become highly effective and highly efficient. And in any strategy that you're trying to execute, and I really want to go back to this, any strategy, if you'll think about it as a people strategy first, I mean, you may be launching a product, you may be starting up a new company, but at the end of the day, people still do business with people. And when we break it down to the lowest common denominator, I think leaders find a higher degree of success and their effectiveness.
That's phenomenal. So there's a couple things. One, I just want to compliment you. You've always been a people-driven leader. I mean, you were the first leader I worked with who had as a prime target, like equal to revenue, was amount of unplanned turnover. You've always it's okay, people can leave. And as a matter of fact, if you plan it right, people are getting promoted, they are leaving. That's a good thing. But unplanned turnover was always like, that would crush you. And you've been like that for forever because you know how much people matter. But the other part of this is, I want to get a little more technical on this role clarity thing, because yes, we can all say people matter. It's a timeless truth. It's a timeless truth. It has never changed. With that said, it's really easy to say, hard to do.
Thinking out loud as you say that, ultimately at the end of the day, the buck did stop with me. I had full accountability, but my approach, and you know this, Tim, my approach with a leadership team, and I was working with my direct leadership team on this, is to bring them along in the decision process. Because I've found when you have ownership, especially your team has ownership in the decision, then they have ownership in its success, right? And so when I take that approach, I've learned that you don't get the distraction, you don't get the division within the organization, because we're all holding hands and we've all taken the ownership. So in this particular example, and it was very much a leadership team coming together a couple of times a week, working through what's working, what's not working. And at the end of the day, where my lesson, where my learning came through a failure, was not reacting. Was
interesting,
because what I, and one of the a turning point for me is in one of our leadership sessions, one of my senior leaders said, why don't we take a different approach? We keep going after the same exact issue with different approaches, and we're getting the exact same outcome. What if we put dedicated business development managers in place, and their only role is to hunt and close new business, and they don't maintenance or manage a customer portfolio? What if we do that? Now, listen, that's been around forever.
Sure.
But in our organization, which you know, we didn't use that role. It was a novel idea to us. It was new. Matter of fact, we had to go and develop the role in our HR system so that we could put people in those roles, and we did it. We took small steps at first, and it worked.
Wow.
What we found is these dedicated new business development hunters could go out, and they knew how to close deals. They closed deals, handed them over to, if you will, the farmers, the professional customer management people, and it worked, and it worked brilliantly. And taking it back to the point around the ownership, it was a senior leader in my organization that brought that to the forefront. Now, here's the dilemma. Here was the problem. The amount of time we burned in trying to execute a strategy that was not working, the amount of time we burned in trying to fix a strategy or an execution that wasn't working, and then the amount of time it took to pivot was costly. Now, remember, these are multi-year contracts. When you close a new customer, they're multi-year, and we're trying to develop a 5-year strategy. A whole lot of customers came out of the market that we could have landed and been much closer to our goal. So in my mind, a major setback, because as leaders, especially me, we became emotionally connected and fixated on our execution. The strategy we were executing was the right one. And through our missteps and our slow starts, we didn't ask the right questions of why is this not working. We just simply kept saying, how can we get better at this? And I think I'll kind of wrap this execution piece, because I do think there's a couple things to talk about, but there's one point I want to make, Tim, about the real lesson that I walked away with from this one. Fail fast. Fail incredibly fast. Failure is priceless. I mean, that's where our knowledge comes from. It's where our learning comes from. We desperately need to fail. We do. But the speed in which you fail dictates the speed in which you'll succeed when you course correct or pivot. And I think, going through that process and learning how we slowed ourselves down, we got in our own way, and we didn't ask the right questions, and therefore it took us too long. Had we recognized failure quickly, pivoted quickly, we would have hit success much more quickly.
If you were like most leaders, you learned how to execute strategy through trial and error, and your teammates learned the same way, if they've even learned it at all. The result is that how we execute our strategies generates massive waste and fatigue. But it doesn't have to be this way. If you'd like to master how strategies execute, go to timohai.com/masterclass now. You'll find everything I use to help my clients thrive all in one power-packed place. Don't you think it's time to invest in yourself? All right, back to the interview.
So I think for me, the biggest walk away was learning how to fail as fast as humanly possible. Look for triggers, look for failure points, because if you're not looking for failure points, you're not looking to learn and to grow and to develop.
Did you have a backup plan before you launched just in case it didn't work and have that worked out? Because to me, having a backup plan requires you to figure out those triggers because then you know when to implement.
The answer to the question is no. We didn't have a backup. This was a multi-component.
Yeah.
So the people strategy was only one piece of growing this revenue, reaching this revenue target in a 5-year window. So it was one component, and I think you're onto something here, because especially when you're dealing with people, you do need to have options. Optionality is critical, right?
Critical.
And what you're describing as a backup plan is having options that are ready, that you can pull the trigger quickly, right? And so
it's
those
all about
didn't exist.
Yeah. And I've said this before on the podcast. You know, when I talk with any group around strategic execution, I ask, are there any veterans in the room? You know, and I'll get a couple raise their hands. I go, were you ever given a mission that didn't have a backup plan? And the answer is always no. No, we were never given a mission. Why? Well, because command knew that it never goes as planned. Plans are only as good as people sitting in the command. So the goal was Charlie Mike, complete the mission. It's not follow the plan. So when I go into business, I am shocked. at how often no one has a backup plan proactively. They always come up with it on the fly, and the amount of waste that's generated, and we talked about financial waste, emotional waste, just tons of stuff, plus goodwill and trust that happens within your own customer base, that kind of waste. And it seems so simple. So why don't leaders do this? Is it because you weren't taught to do this? Is it because it doesn't make sense and there's pressures that we're not seeing? What's going on in those leadership discussions where you're not pausing long enough to say, okay, what's our plan B in case plan A, and we don't even have to go deep into it. We just need to know if plan A is not working, we're going to go to plan B, so that people are at least asking, is it time to go to plan B? Is it time to go to plan B? And you as a leader can say, let me find out.
It's an interesting point you're making. And I think it's a little bit of all of the above that you just described. I do think it's resource driven. I do think it's time management driven. I think leaders today in any organization are crazy busy. Most have more on their plate than they can really truly manage, which is a whole nother podcast you probably need to do one day about
you can
leadership.
Come back anytime, brother.
Yeah, but I think if I were to sort of encapsulate what you just described, there are so many steps you take when you're developing out strategies and business plans, and you're developing out budgets and resources and supply chain logistics, and you put all those components together. I don't know that we have the forward thinking as leaders today to say, okay, what's game plan B and C for each one of these components? Because there's many components, right? And in many instances, leaders today are highly experienced. They've done this more than once. And so in their mind, they know what failure can look like. I think I would add one more component to what you were describing, especially when you think about the military way of thinking, is when we develop these plans, what if we defined at a high level what failure looks like? Because now you have a pause moment. Now you have an intentional reason to say why. Why are we seeing this potential failure trigger? What's causing it? And I think in my mind, it would give you speed and efficiency to course correct or create options much quicker.
Yeah. It's so amazing to me how much you can be as clear as you want to be about where we're trying to go. But if there's any gap in the empowerment aspect, you're only going to cause creation, dysfunction, waste, and ultimately, you'll demotivate and disengage your workforce. And it sounds like you had a team of people going, why are we doing this? As a consequence. And yet backup planning is essential to empowerment, because it's not just about the allocation of assets. It's also the contingencies that we want to be able, because assets are, they're neutral. They're like, we can change. We have human beings. Let's change their role. Let's create a new role. Let's make that pivot. But if you're not connecting those two dots, you're missing out tremendously. So let's just pivot. What are some of the big learnings you walked away with from this experience that you'd want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think the fail fast was for me the big one, the speed in which we can recognize, which we just dug into a bit. I think a couple of more, Tim, especially when I think about leadership attributes, right, which ultimately the makeup and the style of the leader oftentimes dictates an outcome of a strategy being executed. And to explain that a bit, one of the key attributes that we learned through this is the importance of self-awareness. And that's really around asking questions, asking the right questions, being able to listen intently. And I think more importantly, with self-awareness, it's about the ability, if you will, to identify nonverbal communication incredibly quickly. So one of the things that we were lacking in this particular example, we weren't asking questions of the frontline staff. What are you seeing? What are you dealing with? All we knew is that we weren't bringing in the new customers at the pace and the scale in which we needed. Therefore, we created fixes to help them. I think we would have learned much faster and had a greater wealth of knowledge had we sat with the very people, the men and women that were on the front line, dealing with the customer and trying to go out and close a new one. I think that would have closed a lot of gaps for us much more quickly. So self-awareness. And then the second one.
Is that real quick, Jim? Is that also inclusive of reverse engineering? So that it's self-awareness, but there's a reverse engineering component that is required. You almost like you start reverse engineering and then you allow self-awareness to guide you. Is that
I like that. Yeah. I absolutely like that, because I think the reverse engineering component comes first.
Right.
And the cool thing about around self-awareness, that's not a skill set that you're born with. That's one you learn over time and you develop it. And you see people with high degrees of self-awareness that when you walk into a conversation with them, you feel like you're the center of their universe.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate self-awareness in my mind of an individual or a leader. And listen, it's not just in business. It's with your partner, your significant other. It's with your children. It's with your friends. It's with anyone. Hey, listen, when the UPS guy walks up to the front door with a package that needs a signature, it's that. And I think when you practice that day in and day out, that the skill set of self-awareness, especially the nonverbal side of it, becomes easy. And when that becomes easy, then remember, people do business with people, then the people management becomes second nature. Yeah.
That's so good. That is so good. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I would just one more key attribute here, Tim, that I think is incredibly important, and it sounds light, sounds curiosity in such a way that you are engaging, you're asking why. Simon Sinek wrote a book on start with why. It's a really good piece of work that he did, but the whole concept behind it is if you're asking a question, especially in business, but this can relate to any component of your life. If you ask questions, people open up and engage because you gave them permission. And this is incredibly important for leaders, because someone in a leadership role, the organization may be much more respectful, much more quiet, and not spoken till spoken to concept. But when you ask a question, you're giving permission to speak. And now you can dig in and you can really understand, versus making a statement. When you make a statement, you're not giving permission. you're simply making a statement. So I think asking that question, which it's the root of asking a question is being curious. And by the way, curiosity is not something you're born with. It's something you learn over time. Just being curious with people and digging in. Even the simple things like, hey, your son graduated last weekend. How was that? It's just curiosity. And then the dialogue begins.
So good, Jim.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
so good.
It's people, right? It's just people.
It
It's
is
simple.
people. It is people. And at the same time, we seem to, it's so quick. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and it's so quick to talk about people. And at the same time, there's such a trend in leadership right now and I'm talking just at a broad stroke global level of executive leadership, where their understanding of what, or even their empathy for what their people are going through seems more disconnected than I've ever seen. I was talking with a previous guest on this podcast. Actually, he's a good friend, and we were just talking recently, and he was telling me, and he's older, he's like been around for a while, and he's like, I have not seen it this bad in my entire career. And he's in his 60s, and he's just like, hey, I've never seen the disconnect this bad between what executives are expecting from their people, and their people are like, you're killing me. There's so many things that we need to be able to do it. There's so many things you don't understand that are attached to the request you're making, and blah, blah, blah. And Jim, what you're talking about is strategy is a people business. It's a people discipline. It's a people art. And if you're not 110%, and I know that mathematically it's not really true, but if you're not fully committed into that people part of it, your strategy is only good on the day it was written.
That's right. That's right. That's interesting, Tim, because some of the greatest leaders that I've known or worked with or read about, they understand the dynamic of people.
Yeah.
And because ultimately, when this breakdown in communication, like you were just describing, or the lack of communication, when you think about the speed in which information flows today versus, say, when we just started our careers 30 plus years ago, right? And we were still using facsimile machines and whatnot. But think about the speed in which information can flow today, and therefore the amount of information we push or receive, because the speed in which we can use it. When I think about the amount of information that flows, think about how lost in translation happens frequently, especially when it's by email or text, and you don't have this face-to-face dialogue. There are no nonverbals involved whatsoever. You can't read a facial expression. You can't see someone dart their eyes or frown, right? When you're having a conversation or pushing information out on email. So I think it's critically important for leaders to find a way to have a face-to-face. There's all kind of ways to do it, right? There's virtual town halls. There's, sure. I mean, we have platforms like we have that you use here today to really to see information flowing, right? And I think when you can see information flowing, you can be significantly more successful in how the information is received. Because at the end of the day, the information is only as good as the eyes of the beholder, the one who actually is receiving the information. So I do think your friend you're describing here, I agree with that. I think the disconnect is becoming even greater. I think the divide is becoming greater, and it's because of the tools that we have to communicate with people. And I'm going to say this again, but it's a very simple concept. People do business with people. People lead people. People follow people. It's just people. And when you understand people and what makes people tick, what motivates them, what discourages them, what confuses them, and you understand that, the vast majority of the problems for leaders can go away.
What an excellent way to end. What a fantastic interview, Jim. I'm so grateful that you were on today, but there's just so much goodness there, folks. This is one of those episodes I can tell already. It's going to be worth going back and listening to again, because there's so much density to what's being talked about. that without hesitation, I will say, go back and listen. And not only, I'm not going to say that because the content's good, but I'm saying because I know the source is good. The source has walked it, doesn't just talk it. And you're listening to what I will call battle-tested truth. It really is. And I don't care your industry. I don't care your geography. I don't care the size of your company. These are all true universally. Jim, thank you so much. It's been a joy.
It's good to be with you, my friend.
I hope you enjoyed that interview and got some solid takeaways. Here are 3 that I'd like to highlight. 1, don't become fixated on fixing your plan. It will crush your team and generate massive amounts of waste. Instead, rethink your definition of execution. Execution is not about following a plan. It's about making the right decisions. 2, a massive mistake that many leadership teams make is not having a proactive backup plan defined. By having a plan B already in place, it makes it much easier to recognize the failure triggers of plan A and to quickly pivot without generating more waste. This gets to the heart of what Jim meant by fail fast. 3, curiosity can be learned. You simply need to keep asking why. Not only does it open the door for you to learn what you don't know, it also creates the empathy that you will need in your decision-making. Without this empathy, you will have zero idea how the team will engage with the strategy when you roll it out. In closing, there are 3 things that I would ask of you. First, follow me on LinkedIn and subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter. You'll get even more content that will both challenge and inspire you every week. Second, please share this podcast with at least one other person right now. And third, hit those rating stars on whatever platform you downloaded this podcast. When you do that, it raises the visibility of what we are talking about to people just like you. Holo mua, onward and upward.